Everyone, just give your name for the record. And
My name's David Kelly. I have more extensive written comments, but I know I have 2 minutes, and I want to be quick because I want other people to speak, so I'll be quick. I'm from Greensboro. In its Brigham decision, the Vermont Supreme Court made it clear that all children must have substantially equal access to the revenues we commit to education, and that the, quote, distribution of a resource as precious as educational opportunity may not have as its determining force the mere fortuity of a child's residence. Providing small school grants to children in merged districts while denying those resources to children in towns that have concluded after careful deliberation that consolidation is not in the best interests of their children or their communities will be a violation of Brigham. If there is a clear and convincing justification for that disparate distribution of resources, it is not yet on the public record. We may be handicapping some of our already poorest and smallest rural schools by denying them the same resources we provide to schools in merged districts. And then with the new metrics, we may be measuring the outcomes of those now even poorer schools against statewide averages when the cohorts are so small the averages are sometimes meaningless. If they come begging for equal resources to do their job. I would submit that the good minds on our Supreme Court will find that this scheme is somewhat Kafkaesque and ultimately a violation of Brigham. Thank you.
thank you. And your name for the record?
I'm about to tell you. Thank you, Madam Chair and board members, for this opportunity to testify regarding small schools grant program metrics. I am Carolyn Partridge, and I chair the Windham Elementary School Board. In recent days, I've had the opportunity to talk with some of the authors of Act 60 and the small schools grant legislation. My tenure in the General Assembly began the biennium after Act 60 was enacted, but my understanding was affirmed that the Small Schools Grant Program was created to remedy a consequence of the Act 60 formula. That is to say, funding based on per pupil spending would have a negative impact on small schools, which do not have the economy of scale that larger schools enjoy. The goal of Act 60 was to provide an equal opportunity for education for all Vermont children, essentially eliminating the Small Schools Grant by creating additional requirements other than population size will have a negative impact on the opportunity for education for the students at the Windham Elementary School, as well as other small schools. This will create an environment that the Brigham decision and Act 60 were meant to remedy. This is not how far are you from another school grant, it's a small schools grant, and it was created for that purpose. To speak more directly to the situation in Windham, our location, roads, driving conditions, and weather, that is to say, the factors that geographically isolate us, have not changed. If due to some change in requirements, Windham lost our small schools grant, it would have an extremely negative impact on the educational opportunity for Windham students and therefore violate the intent of Act 60 and Brigham. Also, since I am here before you, I want to personally invite the board to hold its Southern Regional meeting at the Windham Elementary School in September. We would be delighted to host you, and I would be happy to give you a school bus ride down and back up Windham Hill, so you can see for yourself, albeit in good weather, the driving conditions and travel routes we contend with. Thank you again for the opportunity, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
My name is Stephen Mason. As a school board chair of the Lowell Graded School for the last 13 years and a member of the North Country Supervisor Union Board, I've seen many of our schools in the Northeast Kingdom work their way through one crisis after another. Annually, we undergo what I call budget anxiety. Will our communities support our carefully crafted budgets? This while knowing that they will likely present to the community a school budget that has one of the lowest per pupil costs in the state of Vermont. In addition to the anxiety over whether the budget will pass muster with our fiscally conservative constituents, households that are, for the most part, operating on the fringe of the economic spectrum A main worry is the loss of what is appropriately termed small schools grant. In a supervisory union that is mostly dependent on small schools grants, 7 out of 11 schools depend on them. Lowell Graded School is a poster child for why they are so important. You see, we operate without a safety net. We fill mandated positions at the school with partial FTEs. Physical education, 0.4, media and tech. We look for instructors with dual skills to save costs. Arts, 0.2, guidance counselor, 0.5, band music, 0.4, nursing, 0.4. Positions are partial. In this way, we meet the minimum standards for those positions and they stay within a very tight budget. Currently, the small schools grant makes up 9% of the Lowell school budget. What will cutting small schools grants have? What effect will they have on our students' well-being? We depend on local merchants to give us the absolute best price of materials and services, knowing that it takes that to keep our building and our grounds safe and looking in a way that makes us proud of our little school. Pride is important to us. It is important to our families and to our students. In our neck of the woods in a down economy, and make no mistake, ours is always a down economy.
Sorry, it's just been.
You find pride in surviving with dignity. The fact that 82.4% of our community's families, the highest percentage in the state, qualify for what is known as free and reduced lunches.
Thank you.
If I could just read the last.
It's over 2 minutes. Just if you have written testimony, we'll gladly take it.
I did submit it via email.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. We have others.
I'm Corinne Park, Chair of the Barnard School Board. If you approve the metrics as discussed at your last meeting, you will be sacrificing educational opportunities for some of the least advantaged children in the state, closing many rural schools and forcing children to travel to distant schools that do not support them as well as their community school. Current small schools grants funding is $7.6 million out of the $1,627,000,000 spending from the Ed Fund, less than 0.5% of the budget. We are responsible for the reasonably foreseen consequences of our decisions. Is sacrificing the well-being of Vermont's neediest children worth those savings? And given Act 60, would your decision be lawful? You have an opportunity today and responsibility to do no harm. I hope you have the courage and the integrity to take it. Thank you.
Hello, Jody Normando, Dormiston School Board. Our chair, Christina, could not be here, so I'm going to read what our school board presented. She was going to present it, so pardon me if I read it. Dear Chair Huling and State Board of Education members, we are writing to express our concern about the future of small schools grants and how they will assure the equity for Vermont students in small rural schools. The flawed formula the Agency of Education used to determine geographic isolation treats our public school students as less deserving of a short bus ride than students who attend independent schools by failing to consider the entire bus ride. In addition, our rural schools often have high levels of student poverty, and these grants help to assure that students receive an equitable education. The metrics established by the AOE for geographic isolation deemed it acceptable for our K-8 students to travel almost 2 hours round trip if our local school were closed. This reasonable drive time was established by comparing apples and oranges, drive times between schools for public students as compared with drive times from home to school for students attending independent schools. According to the AOE memo from Donna Russo-Savage of August 30th, 17, the reasonable drive time between schools was established at 15 minutes or less between the current and next closest school, citing that 33% of tuition students traveling to independent schools travel longer than 20 minutes door to door. This number fails to consider the long drive times Vermont's rural students undertake to get to their current school, before adding the additional travel time to the nearest school. 15 minutes is an amount of time to travel to the nearest school may sound reasonable. However, this is only a small portion of their trip, as no students live at the school. In Dummerston, the scheduled bus trip for many students is already 1.5 hours. This does not include the time spent getting to the bus stop, which can be 5 minutes or more away by car in each direction in good road conditions. This would create a journey for many of our K-8 students of almost 2 hours, while the study would be almost 57 minutes if our local school were closed. This is almost 3 times the number used to determine a long commute for private school students. It should also be noted that Putney Central School Board, Putney Central School, Dummerston's nearest school, does not currently have capacity for all Dummerston students. We urge the board to consider the entire trip to establish reasonable travel times for a Vermont public school kindergartner to receive public education, and not treat Vermont's rural public school students as second-class citizens to those with private school vouchers. We are also concerned that the elimination of small schools grants violates the intent of the Brigham decision and Act 60, which was to help provide equity to students in rural schools. The requirement that we assure that all Vermont children are receiving an equitable education is not removed by Act 46 or 49. Thank you for your consideration, the Dummerston Town School Board. Thank you.
Margaret McLean Peacham. Last month I testified related to the metric student test scores from students of poverty. Today I've got 2 comments related to geographic isolation and the metric related to merger. The 2011 GI metric document took considerable AOE staff time to create. The metrics included were based on 2 measures, distance and time traveled. Current AOE staff has discounted the validity of the 2011 document, but up until this time they have not produced a document that is equal or superior to that document and includes research and data. The AOE has had since summer to consider the issue of geographic isolation. I would have expected in that time something could have been produced based on research and data for the board to review. For example, a list of policies from other states about geographic isolation and time travel by students would have given the board something else to consider. It is not enough to discount the work of previous staffers without putting in the work to produce something as good or better. Yet here you are at the last minute without something better. In light of that, the least you can do is consider the use of the 2011 metrics to determine GI. Though many, including myself, consider them flawed, they at least have a methodology. They do not include time travel from home to school before time travel to the next nearest school, so they only present partial information, nor do they define capacity. But the 2011 document is a document with some level of research and credibility. At this time, it seems to be all you've got. Metric related to merger. The proposed metric is submission of a merger, not standalone report, to the SBE, which would equal 2 points. Peacham formed a joint study committee with 2 neighboring towns to explore merger. Peacham did not join a 706B committee as it realized that merger with neighbors would require a change in operation, something our community would not consider. Peacham formed a merger study committee. The committee explored 4 options fully, including one with a town 25 miles away. We remained voluntary members of the 706B committee with our neighbors and attended every meeting they held, in addition to our own study committee meetings.
It's been 2.
I'm almost finished. The committee developed a 40-page report. There's a website for that. The report was voted on at town meeting and accepted by the board. Under Act 49, it became possible to remain a standalone district, but help our neighbors receive incentives and merge as their proposed side-by-side have fallen through. Without our help, they would not receive tax credits, which they had promised their communities. A 3-by-1 merger document was developed, utilizing the work of the local communities. This was presented and accepted by the board. This multi-step 2-year process took thousands of volunteer hours, but does not count towards any points on the metric. This is so blatantly discriminatory and punitive, it's laughable. These metrics are a system designed for failure.
Okay, thanks.
If I didn't already know it, I would think these metrics were specifically designed to increase fiscal pressure with the intention of closing rural schools. Thank you.
My name is Pamela Fraser, but I am reading the testimony of Randall Zott, who were both from Barnard. He could not be here. In 2011, Act 153, Section 21 tasked the then Commissioner of Education to identify small schools that are geographically isolated. A study was conducted and released, which established a list of 23 schools for which, quote, either the driving times or distances along with the travel route were an obstacle in transporting students, end quote. Barnard Academy was on that list. I can safely say that our school sits in the same location, along the same roads which traverse the same topography. I only assume that this is likely true of other schools on the list. There is no compelling reason to change the metrics for geographic isolation of small schools unless the express intention is to make small schools untenable. The 2011 list and its concomitant commitment metrics should be a baseline from which to add other schools and/or more inclusive metrics. To disavow the list or to create narrower metrics would appear punitive and would further discriminate against already vulnerable school districts. In that regard, insulating more schools, not fewer, from the pressure to close or consolidate should be the goal. When students are struggling, the humane thing to do is to support them. The same should hold true for schools. Sadly, we are transitioning to a time when rather than help those that are struggling, we help those that are not. This appears to be the path we are on with the small schools grants. Merged districts will receive small school grants rebranded as merger support grants in perpetuity without having to beg year in and year out for the money. So larger districts with more resources are given further advantage over their less advantaged neighboring communities. This is wrong. It is inequitable. The SBE has an opportunity to establish metrics that could partially alleviate this disparity of power. The work has already been done for you. Please use the 2011 metrics as the starting point for your work to fight educational inequality.
Hi, I'm Scott Thompson from Calais, also on the U32 board. Small school grant metrics. It sounds so comfortingly technical, doesn't it? But as you can see, it's intensely political and even moral. Seems to me that you are facing a decision whether to take action reinforcing the great American inequality machine or to make a modest but significant stance in favor of genuine real-life equity, to support the words that crop up so frequently in the documentation. You know what I'm talking about, right? This is the structural propensity, even of a growing economy, to transfer wealth preferentially from poorer to richer, from country to city, from younger to older generations, from public domain to private hands. What this does is to set in motion a negative feedback loop, or sucking whirlpool of doom, if you prefer, that is implicated in virtually every single issue that we, all of us as an education community, face, from declining enrollment to poverty to substance abuse to the rise in special education needs and costs, even to the puzzle of how taxes, property taxes, can be constant in the aggregate over time and as a proportion of the economy, and yet people are paying more. Unfortunately, this structural warp is normalized even in our own minds. Nobody sees it as remarkable what was just mentioned in Act 46, this translation of small school grants into merger support grants. Great. So as the hook comes out, I just hope that you will consider that aspect. You really can make a difference, and I hope you choose to. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda Treesh. I'm on the AGS committee from Barnard, a subset of the Barnard Academy School Board. I'm going to speak on the point of whether or not you're going to change the small school grant geographic isolation qualifying time between school from 15 minutes to 30 minutes. I strongly encourage you to stick to the current 15-minute metric to qualify for small school grants. I live in Barnard, and Barnard Academy has a 15-minute school-to-school distance with Woodstock Elementary, so it is highly relevant to us. 15 minutes may not seem like a lot of time on a bus. However, I believe there are very valid reasons why the limit was created during the Act 60 process. School-to-school distance does not reflect the real-time students spend on a bus. Drive time in a car to our school from the outlying edges of town could be as long as 20 minutes for some families, and the one school bus that travels around town picking up kids does it for 50 minutes now and only reaches 60% of the kids. Kids are already spending a lot of time traveling on buses and cars with the current metric. Point 2. Some towns have more complicated geography than others. Barnard is almost 500 feet of elevation above Woodstock, and travel on the road between Barnard and Woodstock can be treacherous a large percentage of the school year. Due to its elevation, Barnard has almost daily nuisance snow in the winter, causing slower travel times and safety concerns. Last year, the bus slid off the road and got stuck while traveling between Barnard Academy and Woodstock Union High School, with middle schoolers and high schools on the bus, and the students had to wait in cold temperatures for 45 minutes until a new bus arrived. Different towns have different terrain, and while 15 minutes of travel may be easy between some towns, that is not true for Barnard. I encourage you to not change these time metrics. They are created with good thoughtfulness and concern for the welfare of our kids and the quality of their school experience. The standards of Vermont schools and school children needs to remain the same, not despite these challenging times, but because of it.
Is there anybody else on anything besides Act 46? All right, so thank you for the public comment.